Okay, here's $1,000,000 question. How do you get your sub $1,000 cell phone videos to look like that $50,000 camera rig? Or if you have a dedicated camera already, how do you get the most out of it? I'm going to cover some of those techniques to do that in this workshop. It's a 3-step process. It starts with understanding the camera you already have. It moves into how we compose subjects with that camera. And finally, we get into how to edit the footage together for the best possible impact. Now that you've seen what a cell phone can do, we can dispel all of the ideas in your head that you need to go out and buy expensive cameras and lenses and those lights over there, ooh, and that slider. You do not need those things. But what you do absolutely need is to understand the tool that you have available to you, and that starts with diving into the manual settings. On cell phones, this might be called Pro Mode. If you can't find that, and you do some Googling and it turns out that your cell phone doesn't have the capability of doing a manual video mode, hang tight. It does. There's an app called Filmic Pro if you don't have access to the manual mode. It's a $15 app that will give you all the controls we talk about here, and that is better than spending $500 plus on a dedicated camera when you're just trying to learn the basics. If you already have a dedicated camera, you definitely have manual mode. You just have to find it. It's usually twisting the dial on the top of the camera where it says M. So, why do we want to be in manual mode? Aren't cameras good enough to make adjustments for us these days? It's 2020. Like, what are we even doing? Videography is both an art and a craft. On the art side, it means you have to make decisions like, what do I want in focus? Where do I want my subject in the frame? How large do I want them compared to their surroundings? And then there's the craft side of videography, which Hollywood and other cinematographers around the world have been building and refining literally over a century. And one of those building blocks that has been sewn into the craft is that you don't want things like exposure to be constantly jumping around, changing every little time you move your camera. And that's what automatic mode does on cell phones and on bigger cameras. You point the camera at something and it calculates it and it exposes it perfectly. And then you move the camera just a little bit and it recalculates and it tries to re-expose. And all of those little micro adjustments are visible in the end product. This isn't how the human eye sees the world, and it's not what Hollywood has defined as cinematic. So, we want to get a hold of these manual settings so that they're not constantly jumping around on us, so that we can lock them down. Need to take a breath. The biggest, most foundational thing when it comes to using any camera is understanding the exposure triangle. Now that we have access to manual settings, shutter speed, ISO, and sometimes aperture depending on what you're shooting with. Now what? What do all of these things mean? In the 30 minutes we have together, there's literally not enough time to cover all of the technical details, but I will give you a big picture view. I'm warning you though, this section bores most people. It bored me and it took me years to learn it, not because it's complicated, but because it isn't sexy. It's literally math. But don't let me scare you. I'm not going to dive into the deep math of this stuff. We're going to go over in broad strokes. It's going to take a few minutes, and I promise there is sexier stuff after. But this is the barrier to entry. I'm going to say that again. Understanding the exposure triangle is the barrier to entry to making your videos look good. A 3-ball cascade is the barrier to entry for juggling. It's hard, but it's foundation. It takes time, and in hindsight, it's pretty boring. But it opens up doors, and it's very difficult to progress without it. The exposure triangle is the 3-ball cascade of both photography and of videography. Let's jump in. Light is all around us. When you point your camera at the world and you try to record it, it's just recording light that comes towards you. It passes through your lens and it is impressed onto your camera's sensor. In manual mode, which remember allows us to control our settings, you have to make decisions. This is going to be a recurring theme. You have to make decisions. Getting the right amount of light to hit your sensor is based on 3 decisions. First, how much light are you going to let in through your lens? On bigger lenses, you can see these physical interlocking blades in between the glass elements. This is the aperture. I think of it like the iris of an eyeball. When it's really bright outside, our irises close down. They get smaller. They let less light in because it's super bright. When it's dark, though, the iris opens up. It gets wide. It allows more light in so that we can see better. The wider you have your aperture open, the more light you're letting in. And also, hot tip, the blurrier you can get your background behind the subject. That's a hot tip. That's what aperture can do for you. The wider you can open it, the blurrier you can make the background. And people love those blurry backgrounds. They love it because it draws our attention to subjects. It removes distraction and starts to mimic the way your eyes actually see the world. Here's an exercise for you. Focus your attention on me, okay? Yes, me, I'm right here. I'm on your screen. Now, without shifting focus away from me, notice how everything behind your screen is blurry. This is why we love blurry backgrounds in photos and in videos, because it's the way we actually see the world. Okay, second piece of the exposure triangle. We have this little door in between the lens and the sensor, and we choose how long that door stays open to let light in that the lens gathered. That's called the shutter. It's about speed. How long do we let it open for? Usually a fraction of a second. 1/50th, 1/60th, 1/100th. And what that means is 1/50th of a second. 1/60th of a second. And the longer you keep that shutter open, the more motion blur happens in your recording. That's the hot tip for shutter speed. Alternatively, the faster the shutter speed, the less time you leave it open, the sharper the movement is in your recording, whether that's a photo or a video. Lastly, the light is gathered by the lens, it passes through the aperture, it passes again through the shutter, and it hits your sensor, a little square that takes the light and interprets it into an image. And this brings us to our manual control that is last but not least of the exposure triangle. That is ISO. ISO is how sensitive your sensor is to the light hitting it. If a ton of light is hitting it, you can dial that ISO back like, whoa, super bright sun, calm down. But where it's more often used is when there's not much light. When you're indoors or when it's nighttime, when it's dark outside, and you need that sensor to be as sensitive as possible to light because you barely have any light to work with. And so, why not just crank that ISO sensitivity up and get those super dope night shots that we all want? This is the trick here. This is what people pay big bucks for when it comes to nice video cameras. When you raise that ISO up and you make your sensor more sensitive, you also increase the amount of noise in your recordings. Generally speaking, the nicer and more expensive the camera, the more sensitive you can make your sensor using ISO without introducing noise that will kill your image. Have you noticed a pattern yet? Every adjustment we make in the exposure triangle comes with a trade-off. When you buy light with aperture, you lose depth of field and the ability to focus on many things at once. When you buy light from the shutter, you lose sharpness in motion and things start getting blurrier. When you buy light from ISO, you increase noise and artifacts and you lose out on fine details in the image. They're all trade-offs. It's all a very delicate balance, and it's very scientific and mathematical. And that's why cameras can automatically calculate this stuff for us. However, like I said earlier, we don't really want them to, because we don't want the camera to make our creative decisions for us. And we don't want the camera constantly recalculating these adjustments on the fly every time our camera scene just slightly changes. It's just not the way our eyes see the world, and so it just looks jarring to us. That was an overview of conceptual. I have a 3-part longer videography course where I go deeper, and you can head over to kaisosceles.com and sign up to get notified about that course. We're bouncing into section 2 of 3, composition. Composition is just a fancy word that means arranging elements in a frame to direct the eye of the viewer. You can see how I positioned these 2 bodies of text right here. I did that on purpose because I wanted to demonstrate how placing things in a frame can guide your eyes around that frame. Your eyes start up in the upper left corner, and then the placement of this second body of text guides your eyes to the lower right of the frame. The thing about composition is, at some point, we're all going to see something that we want to shoot. We're all going to pull out our camera, pull it up to our eyes, and we're going to have to make decisions, okay? When I pull out my camera and I start lining up a composition, I have a rule. My rule is that I will never only shoot the first composition that my camera lands on. As living creatures, we have patterned body mechanics that feel good to us. You're standing around, you see something you want to shoot, you pull out your camera, and where does it go? My camera naturally wants to raise up to my eye level, right in front of my face. And yes, that's one composition. The composition that mimics what the eyes see at a human eye level. My composition rule says that's almost never the best composition that you can get. It's just the one that feels natural. And so we all know that to improve upon any craft, upon any art form, we need to expand our definition of comfort. We need to play in those uncomfortable spaces, spaces that other people don't venture. So what do? I start by going through my library of compositional guidelines, and that's what we're going to go over in this next section. Mind you, I didn't invent any of these, and there are more out there. These ones, I feel like they're just too important not to tell you about. I would feel like I was cheating you if I didn't talk about them. The first guideline is the rule of thirds. Now, hold up. I know a lot of you are out there like, yeah, I know the rule of thirds, like let's get on with it. I want you to hang tight because I'm gonna go deep on this. I'm not going deep on any of this other stuff because I have a longer course, but this one, we're going deep. The rule of thirds is a deep foundation that too many people stay shallow with, so we're gonna dive in, if you'll excuse the pun. Okay, I know you all love grids out there, and this is a foundational grid for composition in both photography and in videography. It's a tic-tac-toe that cuts the frame into thirds vertically and horizontally. But instead of focusing on the areas where you would normally put the X's and the O's in tic-tac-toe, we want to focus on the 4 intersections that these lines make. That's where we want to place our subjects. Not in the white spaces, but on the intersecting lines. This is the shallow end of the pool, and we're going to wade a little bit deeper. If you need some floaties, this is the time to grab them. The rule of thirds starts at its most basic with horizons. Horizons are just things we see in everyday life. They're very natural. So every time we shoot a real place on Earth, we have a horizon. Even indoors, horizon lines still exist. So when I pull out my camera and I start lining up a composition, I'm looking at the horizon line first. Sometimes, in fact a lot of times, this conflicts with lining up your subject onto thirds, and that's okay. I like to start here just to get my bearings. Now that we've got that horizon onto horizontal thirds, let's get our subject onto vertical thirds. Boom. Composition complete. Every frame has a subject. If your frame doesn't, figure it out. Subjects don't have to be people, but the person who sees the frame, like your audience, they should be able to tell you who or what the subject is. Look at this image. What's the subject? The rocks. Boom. Like, this isn't a law of any sorts, but it's a damn good guideline. If someone else can't tell you what the subject of your frame is, clarify your subject and reframe your shot. Shoot it again. All right. We're going half a layer deeper here with the concept of counterpoints. Yes, you can place your subject on thirds. Excellent. But now your frame is off balance. Guaranteed off balance. That's the nature of using thirds. So what do? You look for a counterbalance on the opposite end of the frame. Now at this point, I understand some of you may be questioning my teaching methods. You may be saying, this is all really great, Kai, but it seems like this works for pictures. We're here for video. Like, what's going on? Videos are just multiple photos per second. So many of the same rules apply between photography and videography. Photography is the foundation of video. As film analyst Tony Zhou says, every frame a painting. And he was referencing cinema. He was referencing moving pictures. But in the language of single frames, one at a time, carefully considered, carefully constructed, that's why we're using photos here. In my longer course, we will go through videos and break down scenes using the concepts that we're learning. So if you want to put more time than 30 minutes into this, head over to kaisosceles.com and sign up to get the info. We're going to keep on rocking. Last up on thirds, the most under-talked about, misunderstood, just nobody talks about this, and it's ridiculous, and it's just ridiculous. This is just one that I had to learn on my own. The rule of thirds is about movement. The rule of center symmetry, which we'll go over next, is about stillness. Look at this runner. Are they running towards something, or are they running away from something? I'm going to give you a second to think about that. Are they running towards something or away from something? The rule of space. It's a sub-rule of the rule of thirds. The rule of space considers the direction your subject is moving, or even just facing, and says, okay, you can put them on one side of thirds and have space in front of them, or you can put them on the other side of thirds and have space behind them. That's a creative decision. Which one do you choose? It depends on the story you want to tell, but I'll say this. The general rule of thumb is to give more space in the direction your subject is facing. If you don't have a purposeful intention for where you're placing that negative space, put the extra space in the direction they're facing. Again, these are just guidelines. They're supposed to help speed up our creative process. You can break them. Great artists do every day. But when you break them, make sure that your decision is motivated. Make sure you understand what you're communicating to a viewer by breaking that rule. In this instance, you're communicating that this runner is running away from something. There's a visual language happening here. There's communication here. So make sure that you're communicating what you want. Okay, hopping away from the rule of thirds. I love the rule of thirds, but it's actually only one half of what I consider to be the foundation for composition. We're not going to go as deep into this second half, but I cannot not mention it because I would be cheating you out of the time that you are spending here. All right, just give it a sec, take a breather, and we're going to go into it. The second grid system we're going to go over is the rule of center symmetry. The rule of thirds, it's about motion. People facing left and right, people moving through the frame left to right. The center rule of symmetry is about stillness. People facing toward or away from the camera. The human eye tracks left to right motion very easily, but it has a harder time tracking front to back motion, okay? So when you have someone facing away or towards the camera, even if they're moving, they will seem more still than if they were placed on thirds, moving left and right. All right, that's all I'm going to cover with composition. I have so many more composition tricks in my 3-part course. If you're just joining, you can sign up for those details over kaisosceles.com. All right, we're diving into the last piece, and that is editing. I live by a firm philosophy of garbage in, garbage out. Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have a good grip and a good practice on the previous 2 sections, understanding your camera and understanding composition, you are going to struggle to force things to look good when you get into the editing process. The job of an editor, and remember, that's going to be you. The job of an editor is made so much easier when the shots look good in the first place. Then you don't have to work magic. You just need to edit. You don't need to be a rock star or a wizard. You don't need special effects and wacky transitions. You just need to know some really basic editing guidelines. And then you have to suffer through stuff like final version 0.7 renders like a normal human being. Everybody has to go through that stuff regardless. So, with that out of the way, the biggest thing we can take away from this last section is that editing is a lie. When we look out into the world and we blink, the entire world does not change in front of us. Our eyes don't get a new angle. They don't get to zoom in. They don't change to a new environment. And so when we cut videos together that do those things, somewhere deep down, we know we're being lied to. We just know. And the thing is, everyone watching this video is putting talented people, oftentimes yourselves, and beautiful things in front of your cameras. When someone gets in front of my camera and is juggling like 7 chainsaws, why would I want to lie about what's happening? I wouldn't want to lie, hell no. I want a wide angle. I want a still frame. I don't want any cuts. I just want them crushing that incredible feat of strength and coordination. The moment I cut to a new angle, deep down the audience thinks, wait, did he like drop the previous scene and then this just got cut together? Did he start and then like, am I being lied to here? Deep down, these questions get asked, even on a subconscious level. So, if the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth, don't lie. Edit as little as possible, because editing can take away from the talent that's being displayed. Now, there is so much more. Focal lengths, shot types, transitions, coloring, diving into a pro editing piece of software to get a taste of how this is all put together. But we are out of time. So if you want more, sign up for details on the 3-section course over at kaisosceles.com. Check out my YouTube channel, where I not only post videos that I shoot of crazy talented people, but I also post behind the scenes breakdowns of how I get those shots, and I also post honest reviews of video gear. I'm also available to shoot if you want to get in front of the camera and make a sweet looking video, so hit me up on social media for that. You can find me everywhere at kaisosceles. Take a breath, we're almost out of here. Thank you for hanging out. Hopefully you learned a few new tricks. I will see you all soon.